completed more than a dozen projects on Kentico, and in addition to their extensive experience throughout the industry on projects with companies like Simmons, Teradata, Envision, Vidant Health, and many others, they've gained an exceptional amount of experience and knowledge along the way, and the client list is certainly long and impressive, including the ones that I've illustrated on this slide. But with that being said, in that brief introduction, I'd like to move towards transitioning over to Andy, and so I'd like to remind you that throughout the presentation, please remember to submit your questions throughout the presentation. We will try to address these questions at the end of the presentation. And again, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Andy Didyk, the VP of Account Services for Ntara, who's going to provide us some education and insight on B2B versus B2C e-commerce and why it matters. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Great, thank you very much, Eric. It's great to be speaking with the audience, and really excited to have the opportunity to work with Kentico on this. So I'd like to make sure that everybody can see my screen, and that's showing okay. That's good. Looking great. So as we get into this topic, the reason we titled it "It's Not Just Like Amazon" is because it's a common misconception that we often encounter when we're talking with clients, especially at the executive level, that they're thinking in broad strategic strokes about incorporating B2B e-commerce into their business. Maybe they're already doing B2C. Maybe they have a traditional model where they're selling just directly to distributors through a distributed geographic sales force. There are a lot of scenarios in which it can seem like, well, let's just put up a website and let our customers transact and go from there. Because it seems like it's something that's simple. Well, it's just like Amazon, right? We're packing stuff up and sending it off in one direction. And because of that misconception, we've put together some learnings we've been in business about 17 years, and been doing B2B and B2C e-commerce for 15 of those. Put together some lessons learned and some ways in which you can take that information to the executives, or if you're an executive yourself who happens to be on the call, that you might be able to get a little bit more education on why the two are so different, B2B versus B2C, and some of the things to look out for as you are considering implementing a program, and then finally, what you may need to do as next steps in order to move forward. So that's actually what I say here in the next slide. I already covered that, what in all we're going to look at. And as a bonus, at the very end, we're going to show you an example of one of our customers that happens to be engaging both in B2B and B2C and B2B2C, which is a bit of a mouthful, but we'll show you how we're doing that for them with some great results here towards the end of the presentation. So Eric's done a great job of explaining who I am. I'm going to skip through a couple of slides here about Ntara and maybe come back to those at the end. But before we begin, we wanted to start with a quick poll of the audience and find out how many of you are attending that are on B2B or B2C. So we'll look at if we go ahead and submit your comments through the chat and just say, is anyone currently engaged in B2B or B2C commerce at this time? We'll give just about 20 seconds here for people to locate their chat, put down their burrito if they're eating a late lunch, and find the chat box to be able to message us and let us know, are you in B2B or B2C? So it looks like as the results are coming in, this is great. Looks like there's a pretty even split here, which is really cool. So we'll be able to here comes a few more. Okay, yeah, we're about even, which is fun. So this will apply to everyone who's on the call, and we're excited to bring these to you. So without further ado, let me move into the findings themselves. So part one of the presentation, what are the differences between B2B and B2C e-commerce? So we've got 10 quick hits that we're going to go through very quickly, so buckle up. To begin with is let's start with what's obvious. Let's define B2C e-commerce is when you are selling directly to a consumer from your website. So you as the company, you may or may not be fulfilling that yourselves. You may be using a third party to fulfill and ship those orders, but you're having a direct relationship, selling directly to the consumer. You're selling lots of products to individual people. On the B2B side, you are doing things differently. You, as a manufacturer or even potentially as a retailer or wholesaler, are selling through another organization, a distributor, another wholesaler, a warehouse, or a retailer that is then selling to consumers. So there's someone in between you, the B2C audience, the consumer, and you, the business. And that begins the story of how B2B is more complex than B2C, because right away, if you look at this, you've got one more entity that's in the mix to contend with, both from a back-end systems and from a marketing and fulfillment standpoint. But that's, for our purposes, how we're defining B2C versus B2B. Something that's really interesting that a lot of people don't know is that B2C commerce, as we're all familiar with via Amazon and other things, is scheduled to be, this status from Gartner, it's scheduled to be $3.2 trillion by the year 2020, and B2B e-commerce is going to be roughly just over double that by 2020. It currently in the US alone is well over double the B2C e-commerce. So there's massive opportunity here. These are sales that before the advent of B2B e-commerce were typically being done by retail sales, or not retail, but B2B salespeople who are going to the various accounts and getting orders filled out and taking the orders and fulfilling them. And you see here that there's a tremendous amount of business and a tremendous amount of upside to be had in the B2B market. So now we'll go through the 10 quick differences. So the difference number one, and this may be obvious too, but when you're looking at B2C e-commerce, the end buyer is the consumer. So the person who's actually ringing the credit card and paying the bill is also the person who's going to be using it 99% of the time. Of course, you have gifts, you have other things where you're buying something on behalf of someone, or maybe shipping something to someone's house. You're going to go pick it up later, or it's for them. But by and large, still you're very connected to the consumer, the one actually using it. In the B2B world, the buyer is typically someone who is specialized. So the person who's actually making that transaction on the B2B website, someone who it's their job to buy things. And then they are taking those things that have been purchased and they're going along to the consumer via a third party, via the retailer. So there's a buyer in procurement at Lowe's that is your audience in a B2B play versus the person who's actually buying the tool or whatever it is in the hardware aisle in the store. So this presents some inherent difficulties in that in going B2B, you have less of a connection with your end consumer. And it can be very tempting to apply traditional marketing techniques and terminology to the B2B buyer, and forgetting that they're often looking at the world very differently. We'll explain in a few more slides here how different that is. So here's a great quote from a B2B analyst at Forrester who's saying, B2B buyers today not only prefer to research online, but they prefer to buy online. 75% indicate that buying from a website is more convenient than buying from a sales representative when purchasing products or services for work. Now, this shouldn't come as too much of a surprise that even though they're not the end user, there was just a great report that came out from a marketing research company today, actually, that talked about the fact that everyone who is a buyer and they have a specialized job in procurement in the B2B world, they also are still on Amazon and they are in other retail websites, Target and Walmart and everything else, buying things just like you and I do in a B2C environment. So their expectations are still high when it comes to the experiences that they're going to have in a B2B environment. They carry them with them into the procurement space, even though their needs are quite different. The second key business in B2C versus B2B is the business goal. So on the B2C side, you're typically looking to acquire more customers. And things are much more fluid. You have a higher volume of customers that are coming in as a B2C provider, and it's all about getting more people into the top of your funnel. On the B2B side, the main goal is usually customer retention, because people aren't usually stumbling into a B2B website as a Lowe's or a Home Depot or a mom and pop retail store that's a buyer. They're not usually jumping into a B2B site without having an introduction from a human being on a direct Salesforce side. However, the reason the focus is on customer retention is because those buyers on the B2B side do carry those B2C expectations into those experiences, and they'd much rather do a routine reorder or a replenishment order via a website than via a salesperson. If that's their only option, as you see in the Forrester chart that's here in the middle, that where 224 B2B buyers and sellers were polled here, you see that 59% of people there in the middle preferred not to interact with a sales rep. And 93% said they preferred to buy online when they decided what to buy. So again, as a business, your goal with B2B e-commerce, more often than not, is providing your buyer with the channel that they want to use, as opposed to trying to fill the top of the funnel and get as many buyers in as possible. The third key difference is the ecosystem. So that's a fancy word, and what we're talking about here is that on the B2C side, we're all familiar with this. We like our brands, our favorite brands on Facebook. We might be friends with a recruiter from that company on LinkedIn, or we certainly might subscribe to a YouTube channel for the Will It Blend or Will It Flush options that some great consumer marketers have put out. And we engage in other ways via email and Twitter and other avenues. In the B2B e-commerce world, because you have a specific selection that's typically being put out for a specific buyer, things are locked down. You typically only introduce a buyer to your B2B website once they've, again, come to you via a sales rep. So they've got to log in with a username and password, and you're not typically able to take advantage of a traditional funnel like you can with B2C, where somebody might be browsing Facebook at night and they see an advertisement pop up at 9 p.m. for a consumer good they want to buy, and they pop over to the website, buy it, put it in their cart, and are out the door. Here you have to be more deliberate in understanding of what the the B2B buyer's environment is like in order to really have an impact on their purchasing process. Another key way that things are different, we promised this in our description, is the idea of punch out. So no, it is not the iconic NES game, 1987. I don't want anyone to know exactly how old I was when that came out, but I do remember it, and it was a great game. You got Glass Joe there on the left, very important. But just to underscore how that relates to B2B, punch out is really different. When we talked about the environment being locked down for a B2B buyer, only about 30% of the buyers that are going to be buying from B2B from some of our customers actually go through the website. The remaining 60% often go through a punch out environment. And what that is it's a term that's being used here where the buyer on the B2B side, again, let's use Lowe's as an example. Someone on the Lowe's side who is a procurement specialist can only buy things through their procurement system at Lowe's. They're not able to pop over to Amazon and buy 60,000 5-gallon buckets and have them shipped over to the warehouse. They have to do it through procurement. And by the same note, they're not able to go to many of our customers' websites either. They have to go through their procurement system. So simply put, what PunchOut is it's a solution in which your e-commerce website, so that's what you see there on the supplier side, so the supplier solutions, the e-commerce catalog, and the order fulfillment system, that all sits behind the user experience that's presented by the buyer's procurement system. In other words, if I'm at Lowe's and the only system I can use is that element there that's in green, the procurement system, I'm still hitting your product catalog, your pricing, the fulfillment, and the customer service sections of your B2B e-commerce website, but I'm doing it via those services being punched out into my procurement system. So this is something that you would set up for higher value B2B buyers that need that extra level of security and oversight according to their organization that aren't part of someone who would just do a normal login and have their personalized experience. So that's kind of a fun thing. It's a way in which B2B is very different. And if you're getting into B2B for the first time for e-commerce, don't be surprised if this comes up as a requirement by your buyer. Key difference number 4 are the types of sales that you're going to be making. On the B2C side, this is fairly intuitive. You've got an example here of a phone on the left. You're going to sell one phone, one product to a lot of different people. Whereas on the B2B side, you're not necessarily having to worry about individual pick, pack, and ship of individual parts, but you might be sending pallets or truckloads or container ships full of orders from your warehousing to your specific B2B customers. They'll need to receive those orders differently. They are most likely going to be processing those to use for resale. So there's some real considerations there. Moving forward on key difference number 5, your product assortment. On the B2C side, everybody who logs in gets the same assortment of products. With few exceptions, if I go to Target from Johnson City, Tennessee, where we're located, and you land at Target.com where you are in Austin, Texas, or New York City, you're going to see the exact same assortment of products available to you. On the B2B side, as many of you are familiar, each customer that logs in will receive, or need to receive as a requirement, a different type of product assortment available to them. So, and that may come down even to the user level, where it could be even more complicated, where someone in procurement gets a certain approved product assortment list that they can buy from, whereas maybe an individual contributor or another buyer within the organization could get a broader set, or someone in marketing could get a different set still. So there's a key amount of personalization that has to occur within your strategy and your systems to be able to support a varying product assortment per customer. And that naturally goes right into pricing and buying terms. On the B2C side, again, if you're just setting up a website and you have that mentality and you want to, everybody can buy the Harry Potter book. There are some, it's the same Harry Potter book for everybody. Everybody's got to, you can choose your shipping. And there may be pricing options because you can get your hardback, your softback, or download it on Kindle. However, on the B2B side, everything can be negotiated, because remember, even though they're buying from a website, most of these people were introduced to you via a human being, via a salesperson. And as such, especially if there is a big deal of large volume or of complexity, you can negotiate your pricing, you can negotiate your payment terms. Some are net 30, some are net 15, some are net 45. Some have no lines of credit and have to use credit cards. And again, your sales reps can offer a discount to help get the deal going and make it happen. So all of these things have to be taken into consideration when you're deploying a site. Otherwise, your B2B folks aren't just gaining a channel that they like, they're losing functionality if you don't consider how to integrate this process into things with the varying pricing and terms that can happen. Key difference number 7, we just kind of touched on this a little bit. With B2C, you've got Visa, PayPal, maybe Apple Pay, some other options, but they all revolve around the almighty credit card. And on the B2B side, there's a different type. You may indeed have corporate Amexes that are part of the purchasing path. However, even the type of credit card is processing that you need is different for B2B than it is for B2C. On the B2B side, you need something called PL3, and without boring you with any technical details, basically PL3 requires a lot more reporting information on what was purchased and the actual text that shows up in the statements from the cards than PL1, which is what you're used to when you get a charge slip now from your credit card company. You're also dealing with lines of credit, direct wire transfer, and potentially ERP integrations or procurement integrations if you're doing punch out or potentially EDI. So there's a lot to consider on that side as well. Number 8, to take this further down the purchasing funnel, on the B2C side, you're dealing with really no approval process. In my case, my CFO, who is my wife, would have to approve any purchases I make on Amazon, and in fact she prefers to make them for me. But for most of us, we don't have to receive any type of formal approval in order to buy something as a consumer. On the B2B side, there could be multiple layers of approval. So you need a system that can support and a plan to support the multiple levels that you have here. So you may need to select a product and get a pricing for it, and then have that approved via the end user or their manager. It could require procurement or finance to take a look at it, especially if terms and the payment have been negotiated. Accounts payable may need to do the final stamp on it. And you have to take into account a potential audit trail, because doing business with business is always different, and there needs to be a consistent record of all the purchases that have been made. All right, coming into the round stretch of the key differences, and then soon we'll move into the why should I bother with all this complexity and some business cases in just a minute. But on the B2C side, organizational ownership is what we're talking about here, where if you're in an organization now and you're running B2C e-commerce, it's typically, most of the time, there are exceptions to this, it's typically chiefly owned by the marketing department, and rightfully so in our opinion, because there is no more intimate customer touch point you can have than doing a direct transaction with them and ensuring that they're receiving their product, they're fulfilled by their product, they've got a way to write back to you with your reviews and interact with you on social. So there's a lot of upside for the brand, and marketing, it just makes sense to own it. There's some support from IT and from operations because of fulfillment and certainly customer logs and everything else that goes along with it. On the B2B side, it's a different story. If you're in marketing right now and you want to implement B2B e-commerce for all the wonderful business reasons we'll show you in just a moment, be ready to roll up your sleeves and work with IT and with operations, because of all of the things we just talked about in differences 1 through 9 and what we'll continue to speak about today, there's a lot of operational things that need to be dealt with. How are you going to integrate the configure and price and quote process for complex orders? How are you going to interface with your customers' ERP systems? How are you going to take your tables of customer pricing and make sure they're applied correctly for each customer upon login? All of these things need to be addressed and worked on in conjunction with IT and operations. So really a strong difference between the organizational ownership between B2C and B2B. And I lied, we only have 9, not 10. But what we'll move into now is talking about why deploy it. We've talked a lot already about the fact that this is a very complex thing. It's not just like Amazon. It's not as easy as spinning up a site that is simple and has a shopping cart and can take a credit card. So why bother with this mess at all? So the first reason should be the most obvious one, and that is, as we've hammered on already, B2B buyers prefer this channel. They want it. In 2015, Forrester reports that almost 60% of B2B buyers make over 1/2 of their work purchases online. 60%. So although it's complicated, this is the preferred channel, and if you're not doing this, you can bet that your competitors are. Amazon's opened up a business channel, Amazon Business, and from the stat we showed at the beginning with B2B being over twice the size of B2C commerce, it's obvious that this is the path forward, and despite the complexities, this is how business is going to continue to do business with other businesses in the future. Got another great quote there from Andy Hoare down there saying that he's a Forrester analyst for B2B e-commerce particularly. It's saying that B2B buyers favor the do-it-yourself options for researching products, and that by a factor of 3 to 1, B2B buyers want to self-educate versus talk to sales representatives to learn about products and services. So it's pretty incredible. I don't know that there are many of us here who would say, hey, I'd really like to talk to a high-pressure salesperson rather than sit on my couch and go through and look at these options, be it for complex technology that you're buying, or infrastructure, or even office supplies. Most of us are familiar with the Amazon model, and even though it's not just like Amazon on the back end at all, it is very much, that's the expectation we bring to it on the front end. So this is the number one reason to implement it, because customers want it. Number 2, to take that even further, buyers' expectations are changing. Not only do they prefer the sales channel, but this sort of changes the relationship that they have with the salespeople. Because your salesperson, it's not that they're not valuable anymore. Remember, most of your B2B customers are still going to come to you through some form of direct sales force. It's that for the actual act of purchasing itself, the B2B buyer wants something that is simple, fast, and convenient. Don't we all? So the opportunity that's here for you is to remove routine tasks from your salespeople and create true consultants. So instead of your salesperson taking an order or a fax, which, believe it or not, there's still a tremendous amount of business in the billions of dollars that's being transacted via faxes and other analog forms, paper tickets. It's incredible. But instead of having them process those things and just take the orders, really educating them and turning that person into a true consultant, someone that is a trusted advisor. We've all heard these terms on the marketing or sales side if you've had any experience. And it's really hard to do, but guess what? If you can take the resources and apply them to B2B e-commerce and lessen the load for routine reorders and help the sales staff understand that this is helping them because now they can take more time to build relationships and bring real value to their customers, that's a win and a huge opportunity. And you can see here in this other chart from Forrester that when asked for what types of purchases do you want to interact with a sales rep, it's the things that you want your sales reps to be doing. They want to interact with them when the purchase is expensive, when it's complex, when negotiating a price. As successful as the Priceline model is for buying airline tickets, people don't like to gamble with B2B purchases. They don't want to have to submit a bid through some online system. They want to talk to somebody that they've got a relationship with that they can then create a good, warm transaction with. Again, also if it requires installation or requires service, these are all higher value tasks that a properly trained sales consultant is able to really bring value to the end buyer in a way that you couldn't before. And these are things that buying professionals are trained in, by the way. We talked about those that have to work through Punch-Out or through other endeavors. They're trained to always negotiate price, to seek good guidance and consulting when making sure that everything they need is included in the purchase and there aren't things that are extra. Or if there is installation, that's taken care of. That's what they're measured on and held accountable for. So it's natural to want to be able to focus your efforts on for your salespeople on these tasks. Now we're getting into some of the real brass tacks of the results of being able to implement B2B e-commerce. So the third reason is that you can gain huge channel efficiencies. So as you are on one hand removing those barriers for your salespeople and allowing them to focus on higher order tasks, you can also have your customers focus on those higher order tasks as well. The routine reorders become really something that is just that, routine, simple. They can manage it via subscription, and we can let it just set it and forget it, and let it manage itself. This greatly reduces the cost to serve for those items. So you have a gain both in your margin and the fact that customers want it, but you also reduce the cost of actually selling that to someone because you don't have a human being, you have a system that's moving that along. And of course you increase your likelihood of retaining the customer. You see here in the graph from Forrester on the right, talking about optimizing channel balance, and forgive me, this is not the most easy graphic to understand, but it is one of the best that shows what this is all about. You see on the right the vertical axis going from generic to custom. On the left it goes from low to high item price, and on the bottom there going from short to long in terms of sales cycle. What this is illustrating is that in the bottom left, with items that are low in price, short sales cycle, and a generic, again, commodity type of product, those things should be serviced by a self-service website. And that allows your conversations to all be elevated into something that is much more complex. So the direct sales, we have the MRI machine, the earth mover, that are examples where you do need to spend time on figuring out, is this the right solution for me? It's got a longer sales cycle. It needs to have a human being involved. The other great thing that happens when you deploy B2B e-commerce is that you do get those great cross-sell and upsell opportunities, where which is internet speak for saying, if you like this, if you customers who bought this, you may also like that, as we've all experienced on Amazon. Those things exist for B2B as well, to ensure that if you buy the printer, you don't forget the toner and those sorts of important things. And believe it or not, those are things that are often missed by even your best salespeople, because they've got to keep track. If they've got to keep track of 50,000 SKUs, there's no way they always remember to cross-sell and upsell correctly. So relying on the website and the technology in B2B to do that, again, just allows you as a team to focus on the higher dollar opportunities with your human capital. And then finally, you get to enjoy proven tangible results. So 1, this is what customers want. 2, you can reposition your salespeople. 3, you can allow for more complex and larger deals. And then 4, we've got some great statistics here, all backed up by Forrester research, that omni-channel customers, so those are defined in these sources as being customers who work with you via a traditional sales channel, like a sales representative, or going through the B2B e-commerce website. But those customers are more loyal than single-channel customers. So if you have a human being and a great technology experience, those customers have a higher loyalty than those that are going through one of those channels only. The second thing is that you can increase revenue and lower costs. You have me at hello. Everybody wants this. So you have 52% lower order costs and 19% average sales growth being reported. And customers, when a company has gone from having no B2B e-commerce to having B2B e-commerce, they're reporting that their customers are spending more after migration to that than they were before, which reinforces the items above. And that's what we've experienced in our customers that we've moved this way also. And then finally, more traffic and brand exposure. If you have people coming to the site to do a task and not just a brochure site, if they're there to buy, most B2B businesses with e-commerce are reporting a 20% increase in web traffic after they deploy the commerce features. So tremendous opportunity to gain and really win on all front, get increased engagement and traffic on the site. So those are the four main reasons that we recommend moving to B2B e-commerce and why many of you and or your competitors are already there. We'd like to round out the presentation, which we will close off in about 5 or 6 minutes with some best-in-class examples of e-commerce, those companies that are doing it really well on the B2B front. Now, I'll say that this in advance that because we don't have logins to the back end or it's proprietary for our customers, we can't show you the behind the curtain view. We'd be happy to do that on a follow-up call with any of you that would like to have a more of a one-on-one demonstration. We do have permission to show some client work in that regard, but here we're going to look more at the front-end experience. So some B2B e-com sites that are doing this really well. One of them is certainly Grainger. They're a juggernaut in this space. They sell a ton of different heavy equipment and industrial supplies, really anything you could need. They're kind of the Amazon of B2B. You can see here from the Google search on the left, the screen grab that's here, that they are employing very sophisticated SEO techniques. So the brand name there, Marson Fastener Rivets, they are the #1 organic result that's there. So they've got very high authority. They've been doing this for a long time, and they just have a great user experience that allows it to be very similar to Amazon. So despite all the complexity that's in the back end, the front end is really, really simple. You can continue to see once you get in, you're able to look at products, their expanded views, their ratings and reviews, and all the things that we know are important. And that, believe it or not, even if you have a salesperson who's really good on your team and they're functioning well and helping the customer to use the B2B site, customers still want validation that they're making the right purchase and the right decision. So that's very important. Ferguson is another brand that does this very well, and you can spend some time on their site outside of this time, but really clean navigation, really easy to get into the site and see what you're looking for. Ferguson does sell to the public as well as to businesses, but the site focuses heavily on the angle of using Ferguson not just as a supplier of commodities, but because those basics are taken care of, they're able to offer that consultative sale and the upsell opportunities. In this case, there's an example of using Ferguson to grow your plumbing or HVAC business. Because they have the B2B e-commerce business down, they're able to focus more on value add to their end users. They do have a great, they've got predictive search on their site. So they're, that's what you see there in the search box that's been highlighted, where if you just type in JAC, it's predicting what you need to know in advance. That's standard with some systems. It is something that it does take some time to train over time and enter in your own corrections, but that's a best in class. And they've also got really robust product pages that are, once you get down to the actual procurement process, are easy to understand, easy to digest, have a very clear call to action. So again, to the consumer or the buyer on the B2B side, this looks very simple and very easy, but they're doing a lot of complex things in the back end to make this work. And finally, before we get into questions, I'd like to fulfill on our promise of the bonus B2B2C example of one of our customers. So B2B2C we define as a company that is selling both business to business and business to consumer, and selling to businesses that are selling directly to consumer. And that gets complicated. When Hunter Fan Company approached us, we found, this was several years ago, we've been their agency of record since 2008. They came to us with some very specific problems. namely that their number one customers were also their number one competitors. So if you've ever seen a Harbor Breeze or a Hampton Bay ceiling fan, those are the house brands of Home Depot and Lowe's, who also happen to be Hunter Fan's biggest customers. So how do you create a site that services, manages that complex e-commerce problem of selling to businesses as well as mom and pop lighting showrooms and retailers, as well as has a great consumer experience and sells directly to the consumers? And we came up with the site that's there today, hunterfan.com. We've had some fantastic successes with them. We've increased their year-over-year revenue over 151%. And a lot of it had to do with building good consumer research out to ensure that on the consumer side we were helping people to shop the way that they shopped naturally. So they were looking for things, little things like understanding that if you most people are looking for a ceiling fan either with a light or without a light, or they're looking for items that were you could use inside or outside. And there's a specific order that we've honed through years of analytics that helps us to show that. We have got some great, what we consider in the analytics bear out best-in-class sorting and filtering options to allow people to easily find the products that they're looking for. And we also help people to shop by style. So being able to shop not just by, hey, do I know that I need a brass finish or a bronze finish, or this is for a big room or a small room, but I'm a contemporary decorator, and I'd like my items to have these types of lines, and so we're going to shop that way. So some other great examples of the various ways that we allow multiple paths, both direct and indirect, to the shopping experience. Great product imagery, very important, and lots of great product detail as well. And as I said, this has been very successful for Hunter, but let me show you just some of the complications of the B2B2C as promised. Once you get down into the actual purchasing path, let me roll forward here. As I mentioned, their biggest client is their biggest competitor. They have some ceiling fans that are manufactured exclusively for a particular retailer. In this case, it's Home Depot. And so we have to have a buy option that is available to buy specifically from Home Depot, as you see here. So that's one path. The site also has to support people going to a physical location locally. So a mom and pop retailer, this is part of the B2B2C process, where Hunter sells to a lighting showroom that may have 1 or 5 showrooms in a metro area, and they want the site to drive traffic to those in order to be a good partner. And so you see here that for this particular fan, there's also an option to have a map that goes directly to that location, and the call to action for the consumer is not to buy online, it's to go to a physical location. In addition to that, for the same fan, you may have a consumer that wants to buy online. And so we offer direct deep linking into Amazon, Wayfair, Home Depot, Delmar, and more as another option there. So, and then finally, there are options there you can see directly to add to the cart and be able to purchase direct from Hunter from the manufacturer itself, which a lot of consumers do prefer. Even at full retail pricing and full shipping, there's always a percentage of the population that wants to buy directly from the source, from the manufacturer. So that is one way. This site is built on Kentico, and we're very proud of it. It's won numerous awards, and it goes to show you the flexibility that we've been able to gain out of having such a great CMS partner to solve the complex challenges of a B2B2C customer with a legacy brand in Hunter Fan Company. So with that, I'd like to turn things back over to Eric. That concludes the formal part of the presentation that we've prepared. And we'd like to see if there are any questions that we can help answer for you on this afternoon.
Andy, thank you. That's great. Let's see here. That's a great presentation. Actually, I know I'm intimately aware of a number of those projects, and actually learned quite a bit from the presentation. So thank you, at least from my side, and hopefully others took something away from this as well. It does look like there are a couple of questions, though. Let me see if I can kind of go through these here for you. All right, here's one. What do you think is the best vehicle in which to communicate to a sales force about new e-commerce deployments and how it might affect them?
Well, that's a great question, because as we talked about earlier, oftentimes Salesforce, they're responsible for a territory or for a particular, in larger accounts, they're responsible for a series of accounts. And they can see, they see a threat when it comes to e-commerce because they feel out of control, like it's not in their hands when a customer is going to do a reorder. They're not able to have as easy of a reason to pick up the phone and say, hey, I see you're running low on this, let me come by, swing by and buy you lunch, and we'll talk about things and get the order taken care of. So that's a very natural thing, and if they are concerned, that means you've got a good sales force. One of the things that we've been able to do to help ease the transition into B2B e-commerce for new customers is, one, to show them the facts that they're typically going to end up selling more in that omni-channel, multi-channel environment than they would if they were selling just by themselves. And the other is we do upfront consulting with the sales leadership as well as the operations to ensure that when sales are made in a specific territory or within a specific geography or within a specific account, that they're properly credited to the salesperson, and that there is, if there's compensation that's on the line, that it's properly accounted for. Not all companies give 100% compensation for routine reorders that they would for a brand new sale, and that's normal. That's the way that things are going. But we definitely think that having good open communication and ensuring that sales leadership is on board to address the concerns alongside of you is very, very important to making this a success.
Nice. Let me see here. Let's see if there's any follow-up on that. Hopefully that answered the question. If there any other clarification you'd like on that, can certainly send a follow-up question on that. Here's another one. What tips do you recommend for getting executive leadership buy-in for an e-commerce deployment?
I think that's another great question because without e-commerce or without executive buy-in, I'll say flatly, there's no way to make a B2B deployment of e-commerce happen. There's simply too many moving parts, too many parts of the organization that it touches and touches in a pretty significant way. Because we didn't even talk about HR or customer service or any of the other support mechanisms within your company. Post-sales support is one of the number one reasons that B2B customers leverage a B2B website. So all of those things need to be integrated. So in terms of advice on how to get that through executive approval, certainly working with the right partner because most companies don't have this expertise internally unless they're doing it already. Finding a good partner to work with that understands these things and can help put together a cohesive assessment of where you are will give you a much better view of what it'll take to get where you're going. Certainly going in and just waving your arms and saying, hey, this is really, really complicated, but we got to do it, is not going to be an effective approach. So we found that the good documentation of where you're at and relying on specific expertise in this space is money well spent. And by the way, that's proven out by Forrester as well. When asked specifically, what do you, as a B2B company, what are you spending money on in IT that is outside of your own areas of expertise? I believe it was 40-some% were saying it was in the e-commerce space and e-commerce platforms because that is not often an area where there's internal expertise. So that was a long-winded answer, but the short version of it is get your facts straight and make sure you spend some time and money up front to gather information so that you are presenting an accurate picture to the executive board.
Yeah. So actually I have a follow-up question on that. As organizations go down the path of e-commerce deployment, do you typically see that they are able to leverage the resources that they have in-house, or does managing an e-commerce deployment necessitate a different skill set or different types of resources?
That's a great question because this does impact so many different areas in the organization. In our experience, we work hand in hand with internal teams and really can't be successful without them. You do often need an outside resource, usually a point person to run the site that either needs to be identified from within or hired from outside of the organization. That's sort of the one central point of contact who's responsible for the business success of the site. However, we found that most organizations have some capacity internally for development. A lot of them have some capacity as far as project management. Remembering the B2B side of things often comes out of operations. So you usually have a lot of competent staff and competence around product information management, things like that can be used to be leveraged and move forward. We found the best approach is usually a combination of education, helping everyone understand how different this audience is from any B2C endeavor you have, and then it's execution and continuous improvement, using your metrics to drive better and better results month over month. But yes, you do need internal support, and there is usually some type of outside support as well.
Nice, thank you. Let's see here. Let's take a quick look. We've probably got time for another couple of questions here. What are some of the ways customer retention can increase when moving to e-commerce?
Well, that's in a lot of ways. That's a long answer. We could do a webinar just on that. But the quick hits are number one, you're going to get better visibility of what they're buying and their behavior on your site than you ever could have just by listening in on a salesperson's conversation or getting them to file an activity in Salesforce. You've got empirical data on that customer and what they're buying. You've got empirical data on what they're not buying, or what combinations of things that they are buying, that if they're successful for them, you could then take and provide to another customer and help them realize value in a way that you didn't have before. So the empirical data is a huge piece of customer retention. The second piece is, just as all the research is that we've shown here, it has a lot to do with the fact that this is what the buyer wants to do. This is how they want to make that procurement happen. So if you're able to just simply give them what they want, that's a big plus. But the only way that really increases retention is if your salesperson is then able to move into a higher level task for them, and a consultant that is helping them to solve problems. The other area that's great is when you have this empirical data and you have a one-to-one relationship that's digital with your consumer, you can start fielding things like surveys and polls and getting reviews that you wouldn't get directly said to a salesperson if something didn't work out, or you wouldn't necessarily get in a way that you could measure. So all of these things add up into your ability to then be able to develop new products, new services, new bundles around the B2B buyer activity that you wouldn't otherwise have if you were in a completely analog salesperson-driven system. So I hope that answers your question.
It answers, I guess, yeah, it gave me the information I'm looking for. We'll see if there are any follow-up questions come from that, but that was good.
Great.
And let's take a look here. Here we go. How can companies easily overcome potential barriers in deploying B2B e-commerce?
Well, I think that one thing, it's a great question because we recently just did a blog post on this, and since I've got the floor, I'll do a shameless plug for it. If you go to our website, it's in the blog section, dealing with overcoming barriers and obstacles to e-commerce. A lot of them have to do around an analysis paralysis regarding the sheer complexity of what's involved. The good news is that there's outside help, but the best way you can get over the objections is to do a pilot program. Pick your 5 or 10 or maybe 1 or 2 best customers that you have a wonderful relationship with, the sort of bulletproof relationships that have been through heck and back and will stand the test of time, that you can try something new with and say, hey, if we either offer you a discount or just because you're a great partner, try this with us, try doing your orders for these particular products through our site. And having that pilot experience and some empirical data that you can then take internally and sell around gives you a huge leg up versus trying to eat the whole elephant, so to speak, and implement all these complexities right away. There's absolutely a way to step through this process in a way that makes sense and that gives you the data and the incremental revenue that you need to fund it itself. A lot of times these are self-funding, particularly after the initial 12-month period, self-funding and then some as you get beyond that 12-month period. And starting out with a pilot program is probably the single best piece of advice that I can give regarding how to get started and overcome those barriers. Because once you have data and saying, hey, customers really enjoy this, really want it, it works, it's very hard for anyone to say no to that.
Yeah. So you've seen on the whole, or the most part, that most organizations who deploy B2B e-commerce are able to recognize a fairly rapid return on investment. Obviously, there's considerations that need to be had there to ensure it's done right, but that ones who approach that project conscientiously are are able to benefit from that initiative.
That's absolutely right, and I think that one of the other fears that people have is that, or the fallacy that's there is someone will say, "Oh, that's revenue I would have had anyway. If I deploy B2B e-commerce and somebody's going through my site, well, that they were a preferred customer and they would have bought from us anyway." And the data that's out there says that's simply not the case. That is a false assumption. What you're doing is you're protecting yourself from that sale going someplace else. Sooner or later, because the preferences are overwhelming, 93% of people saying when they know what they want would prefer to order through a website versus ordering through a sales rep, they're going to go to an easier way to procure. If one of your competitors is doing punch out, or if Amazon is available to them, they're going to do that if they can order it that way versus filling out a fax or picking up the phone every time. So that's another key barrier that you need to address and realize it's a logical fallacy to think that you're cannibalizing your existing business. You're really protecting your existing business with an investment in B2B.
Well, and I guess I've got a question, a carryover question from that. And as they're kind of considering that path, would it make sense then to actually do some type of pilot before, or pilot e-commerce project before they actually go full bore into implementing, the larger initiative?
Definitely. That's something that usually can get greenlit much sooner, because they're not small projects as a whole. If you look at a big deployment, you look at what Grainger's a multi-billion-dollar business, but if you look at what it costs, these are typically larger capital projects to get all these things together. And if you can do, if you can excuse the term, a quick and dirty project that is easy to deploy and easy to get results from, again, picking your target customers that would be most likely to give you real feedback on, and you can get a good feedback loop going and learn quickly, fail quickly, that's usually the most successful way to move forward. And a lot of B2B software providers, as well as we know that the Kentico works this way, allow you to do those pilot programs for a low incremental license costs, and then quickly show success and build on it from there.
Thanks, Andy. Good. Looking at the questions, I don't think there's anything else that's come in. It looks like we've been able to address most of the questions. But in wrapping up, again, Andy, I want to thank you for taking the time to educate us all. I think this is a great session. Again, I certainly learned quite a bit through the presentation.